Hey, this is Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Today I'm going to show you how to reinstall your Polaris XP 1000 engine back into your machine. Welcome back to our engine rebuilding series for the Polaris RZR XP 1000. Now, for this engine, what we've done up to this point, we cleaned everything off, tore it down, took our measurements, and put all the fresh parts that we need back in it. So if you need to know how to get to this point, be sure to reference the other videos in this series. Now, the main reason we were rebuilding our engine is we wanted to get a little more power out of it. So we used the high compression pistons in there when we were reassembling everything. And then something we also did that you don't have to take your engine apart for is the Tusk auto cam chain tensioner. Now, what this does, it's going to eliminate some of the common problems with the stock tensioner, like engine startup noise, and then also you don't want your cam chain to jump time. So this is going to eliminate those problems. Now, with all that being said, let's go ahead and get this put back into our RZR. To do this job, we're going to need a lot of different tools. The ones we're not showing are our engine hoist. We also have a jack, and then we need a drain pan. This is going to be for a bleeding procedure. We have two different funnels, one for coolant, one for oil, and a ratio right. Other than that, we're going to need a lot of different common hand tools, including torque wrenches. And moving over here, these tools are going to help us set the center to center distance on our clutches. So we have the OEM tool from Polaris, or what we're actually going to use is this SDI tool. Now, this not only sets the center to center distance, but it perfectly aligns the shafts, and that way you get the best wear out of your belt. Now, if you do use the SDI tool, you're also going to need to use a flywheel puller. We also have the flywheel holding tool from SLP, and then a tool to spread the clutch sheaves. We have a couple different options. Check out our website for that. And then to drop the motor down into the frame, we have this chain to go along with the engine hoist. And as with any job, it's always nice to have a magnet to pick up any bolts that you drop. And last but not least, you always want to refer to your model-specific service manual for more information, proper procedures, and specs. As far as parts and consumables go, we've already installed our spark plugs and oil filter onto the engine. Now we just need some coolant. We have our engine oil out of the Tusk oil change kit. We have silicone spray, some Loctite, contact cleaner, waterproof grease, and on any new engine, you want to have a fresh air filter. So we're running the OEM air filter. This is under the OEM parts diagram. We have a lot of different options for these parts available on our website, so be sure to check that out. And same thing, if you need any of the special tools, check that out on our website as well. Now we need to get this engine stand adapter plate off, so we'll remove the two bolts. Next, we're going to install the starter, so I'm putting some grease on these O-rings. Then we can install the two mounting bolts and torque them to 7 foot-pounds. After that, we need to install our transmission mounting bracket and make sure that you have your two dowel pins in place. Once you have the bracket set into place, then you're going to torque these bolts down to 44 foot-pounds, and we're going to start with the middle two at 44 foot-pounds, and then we'll do the outer two bolts. So the pattern is going to be number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Next, we're going to install our transmission mounting bracket, and for now we're just going to leave these bolts loose. And now we're ready to lower this motor down into the machine. Now, as you guide the engine into place, just take your time, make sure you don't hang up on anything. Now, to help get these mounts in the correct spot, I'm going to use a punch to kind of line things up. Once the two front motor mounts are lined up, we can install the bolts, and we're going to leave them loose for now. Back in the right hand corner of our machine, we have this bracket that needs to be lined up with the transmission and engine. Now, for most of you guys, it's already going to be on this transmission, but we actually had a damaged bolt in the bottom, and we repaired all those threads, so we already have it on this engine side. So what we're going to do is install these two side bolts, Some of you guys might have to install these 2 bolts. Whichever one it is, you need to line this up. Now for all of these bolts, we're gonna leave them loose for now. Now for some of you guys, the next step would be to install these 2 bolts right here. But for us, we have the SDI motor mounting plate. Now to get everything lined up, I'm gonna place this towel right here, and I might use a breaker bar on this transmission if I have to move it around. So we'll start with that top bolt. Now on this other side of the motor, we're going to install the bolts that attach the motor to the transmission. Now we have this SDI motor mounting plate on ours. Now what this does is, over time, if you just have the 2 stock bolts, this joint can start to sag. So this prevents that from happening. You have the correct center to center distance on the 2 shafts, and that way it's going to extend the belt life. The next step is to set your center to center distance on both of these shafts. You can use this Polaris tool, but we're actually going to use the SDI clutch alignment tool. And what that tool does is it not only sets the center to center distance, but it also makes sure that both shafts are perfectly parallel. And again, that ensures that you get the best belt wear life. So this first shaft is going to go on our crankshaft, and we're just going to use the stock mounting bolt for the drive clutch. So we're going to slide this on, push the bolt down. So when you install this bolt, you want to have it tightened down. We are using an impact to tighten it, but this impact, it doesn't do more than 30 foot-pounds. It doesn't have to be that tight. So just get it snugged down, and we'll go ahead and do the same thing for the transmission shaft. Now the difference is on this one is, again, we're using the bolt that holds that driven clutch in place, but we're going to remove that washer from it. Now we're going to take a little bit of grease and apply it to both of these shafts. Next thing, we'll install the alignment bar. Now you are going to have to move the transmission and motor to get this aligned. So I've got a rag and a pry bar just to kind of help move things around while I get it lined up. Next, we'll install the second bar. Now the next step, we're going to tighten the 4 Allen key bolts on this motor side. And if you need a torque spec for that, you're going to be about 18 foot-pounds. All right, now that we have these bolts tight, what we're looking for back here, we want to be able to spin this shaft with our hand. And if you can't, then you're going to need to make some adjustments. So what we're going to do is move this joint around until the shaft rotates freely. Once it does, we'll tighten these bolts down and start torquing our motor mounts. All right, now we can tighten the bolts that are holding this motor mounting plate in place. We're going to torque them to 50 foot-pounds. We're going to start with the back 2 that are close to the transmission. Then we're going to go to the right side of the motor before we torque the front 2 because we can't access those yet. All right, now on the other side of this machine, we're going to tighten down this bracket right here. So we're going to start at this bottom bolt. We need to go to 5 foot-pounds on this. And all of these bolts, I have them pretty close to almost just being finger tight. So that one's 5 foot-pounds. Number 4 on the sequence is this bottom side. And the rest of these bolts, we're going to go to 44 foot-pounds. Number 5 is the next one up on the side. Number 6 is on the back. And last but not least is the original bolt we tightened on this side. We just need to take it up to 44 foot-pounds. Next thing we're going to do is loosen up these clamps on our alignment bars. All right, so once these bolts are loose back here, you want to make sure front ones are still tight. What you're looking for is to make sure this thing still rotates. If it doesn't, you're not aligned. And the other way to tell that everything's still aligned is if this bar slides off easy, then you know you're good. After that, we can move both of the shafts for our alignment bars. I'm going to pull this shock cover out of the way, and then I'm going to install the clutch puller, and that's going to get this front shaft off. Now with those out of the way, we can go ahead and torque these front 2 bolts down. These are going to be 44 foot-pounds on them. Next, we'll tighten the 4 bolts on our 2 remaining motor mount brackets. And the torque on these is going to be 40 foot-pounds. Next step on this plate, we're going to tighten down our 3 set screws. Then we can tighten down the big set screw. Now that we have our motor mounts tightened down, we can go ahead and remove this chain for the engine hoist from the machine. Next, we'll install these 2 cooling hoses and we'll tighten down the hose clamps. The next step is to connect these cables to the starter. So it's kind of hard to see down in there, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. Just keep in mind that stud that's coming out of the starter, you need to hold that base nut with a wrench while you tighten the outer nut. And now we'll slide the rubber boot into place. Next, we're going to install the throttle body assembly, and to do that, I'm just using some silicone spray. That's just going to help things slide into place. Just spraying that on those intake boots, and we'll pop this into place. Once it's fully seated, we're going to go ahead and tighten down those hose clamps. Next, I'm going to take this wiring harness. I'm going to put it up out of the way for now. And then we're going to install this air boot into place. Make sure that the actual internal part of it is clean. So we'll go ahead and tighten down these hose clamps. Then we'll install the lower mounting bolt. All right, next step, we're going to install the exhaust. Don't forget to use your new header gasket. Next, we'll slide the muffler into place and attach the 2 exhaust springs. The next step is to tighten down the exhaust header bolts to 18 foot-pounds. You really don't have a lot of room in here, so we're actually just using a ball Allen. All right, since we have access to this bleeder screw right now, we're going to go ahead and bleed our cooling system. If we go ahead and put everything back together and then do this step, it's going to be much harder. So we're going to go ahead and loosen this up. Then we'll fill the radiator with coolant. Now once you have that solid stream coming out of this bleeder, we'll go ahead and tighten up the bolt. All right, next step, we're going to install the heat shield. Now we have 2 trim clips that come up through underneath on this cross member right here. Next, we have 2 cross members to put into place. One in front, one in back. We'll go ahead and bolt those down. And at this point, I'm actually going to take these canisters and get them out of the way. I'm going to put them back onto the skid plate. That way they're not just hanging by the cord. Next, we'll install this heat shield on the side. It has 2 bolts holding it on, and that front bolt goes through the heat shield that's horizontal. All right, next step is to get all of our wiring in place. So I'm going to start with this ignition coil. Now for these spark plug boots, we have one that says PTO on it. This is the shorter wire. So we're going to put that on the PTO cylinder. I'm also using a little bit of silicone spray on the rubber to help get this in place easier. You want to make sure that's popped down all the way into place. And this one obviously says mag on it. So we're good to go. We're going to start making the electrical connections throughout the wiring harness. So I'm going to start by making connections up here with the fuel injectors. So on this wiring harness, throughout it, we have these wire ties that have the Christmas tree ends on them. And a lot of these got damaged on our machine. So we went ahead and bought all new ones. So what we're going to do, I'm going to clip this down into place where it goes, and I'll cut them one at a time and zip them around where they need to go. Next thing, we'll install the crankshaft position sensor. Make sure those are clipped all the way in. Connect your sensor on the right side of the throttle body. Next, we'll install the engine coolant temp sensor connection. Then we'll connect the left side of our throttle body. Now we're going to take our fuel line and connect it to our fuel rail. Once that's all the way on, I'm going to push on the green connector. Make sure that's not going to come off. Next thing, I also have a new tie for this fuel line. Next step, we're going to install the air box. Next step, we're going to install these two mounting bolts. Next step, we're also going to be throwing in a new air filter. We don't want to ruin our new engine. So we definitely want to make sure this air filter is in good condition. Next, we'll install the crankcase breather hose. All right, now for the inner clutch cover. We're going to set this in place. Make sure that all your wiring is correctly routed. It's just going to go on top of it. Then we're going to install the 7 bolts that hold this on. And those bolts, Polaris wants you to torque them to 12 foot-pounds. The next step is to install our drive clutch. So you're going to want to make sure the taper on the crankshaft is clean, as well as the taper on the clutch. Once those are clean, you can install that into place and install your bolt. We're going to torque this bolt to 96 foot-pounds, and we're going to use our clutch holding tool while we do that. We're going to place a rag in between this handle and the frame. That's going to help hold everything in place while we torque our bolt. Next step, we're going to apply some grease to the splines of our transmission output shaft, as well as the shaft itself. I also put some grease on our inner clutch. This rusted onto the shaft before, so we just want to make sure that doesn't happen again. And just make sure you don't get any of this grease on the sheaves. So we'll go ahead, put this into place. Make sure your splines line up. Next, we need to get this bolt torqued to 55 foot-pounds. To do that, you have 3 different options. You can have somebody help you and hold this driven clutch in place while you torque that down, which may be kind of difficult. The other option is to use an impact gun on this, but I don't recommend that option. Third, we actually have our clutch tool. This is for the primary drive clutch, and I'm just going to use this tool. It's not a ton of torque, it's 55 foot-pounds, so this is going to work fine for the job. And when you torque this down, it's going to wind up just a little bit. Then we can go ahead and remove the tool. All right, the next step is to install the belt. We're reinstalling it the same way we took it off, so we can read that Polaris right there. So what we need to do is spread these sheaves apart. We're using our clutch spreading tool. Install the belt over the drive clutch, and we'll walk it onto the driven clutch. Remove the spreading tool, and then again, what we're going to do is rotate the driven clutch, make sure the belt comes all the way out. All right, once you've spun this and the belt is all the way out, we can go ahead and install the clutch cover. But to do that, we're going to have to remove this rear shock again, so we'll raise the rear of the machine. And I also want to point out that for these clutches, if you need to do any work to them, if you found any problems, we have videos that show you how to repair those. So be sure to check them out. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribing to our YouTube channel. To help install the cover, I'm using the flex drive tool. That makes the job a lot easier. Now we can take the shock, we'll put it back into place, and we're going to torque that bolt to 70 foot-pounds. Next thing we're going to do is install our vent tubes onto our clutch cover. So I'm going to start with this short one. Keep in mind you have this alignment tab. Once that's all the way on, we can go ahead and tighten down the hose clamp. All right, next we're going to install the tube on the front of the cover. This is really hard to see, I know, but trying to show you guys the best as we can. So we'll go ahead and line this up. You can leave this hose clamp loose until you have the bed installed, or you can tighten it down, but just make sure it's in the correct position. So next, we're going to attach this tube to our air box. This one has an alignment tab on it as well. And we'll go ahead and tighten that down. Now looking through the access panel in the cab, we're going to connect our stator, and keep in mind the back of this plug has a Christmas tree plug on it that's going to go into this rail. The next thing we need to do is install the cargo bed. So these breather tubes, I've sprayed some silicone spray on them. We'll set the cargo bed into place and work the breather tubes into their correct positions. After we've done that, we need to route the wiring. We also have a horn and signal kit on this machine, so we're going to be connecting some extra wires that some of you guys might not have. But whatever wiring you have on here, you need to make sure that it's tied down securely. Once you've done that, you can start installing all of the fasteners into the cargo bed. All right, next thing, shock canister. Feed it up through the cargo bed. We have one more breather tube going to the clutch. So I'm gonna start with that connection down here. And then we need to make our connection to the cargo bed. We've got this bracket holding everything on. Once we tighten that bolt down, we'll go ahead and tighten the hose clamps down. Next, we're going to fill the engine with oil, and it's going to take 2.4 liters, but just make sure you check this on your dipstick. Make sure you filled it up all the way. Next, we'll take our engine access panel and set it down into place. The next things that we need to do are install the rest of our roll cage and any accessories that we had on the machine. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and connect your battery and install your seats. All right, now that we have our seats installed, we're ready to start this thing up. But I do want to point out a few important things before we start it. So this engine does have an engine break-in period. So that's going to be 25 hours or the first 15 gallons of fuel. Now, during the first 3 hours, you want to avoid full throttle. And throughout the entire process, you're going to vary the RPM. So just don't hold the engine RPM at one consistent spot during this time. Now, once you've reached the 25-hour mark, then you can go ahead and change that oil out and ride this thing how you normally would. Now, I do want to point out that once you've ran this engine and let it come up to operating temperature, once you shut the engine off, let it cool down completely. You'll check your coolant level, and the manual even recommends opening the bleeder screw for the coolant and verifying that you have a solid stream of coolant coming out right there. You'll close that up, and you also need to check your engine oil. Now, another important thing, you want to look under there, check around for any leaks and get those repaired if there are any. And that's all there is to getting this RZR 1000 motor installed back into your machine. This is the last video in our RZR 1000 engine rebuilding series. If you missed any of the other videos, be sure to go and check those out and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. Now, as far as parts go, we used a lot of different parts on this motor, so you can find those on our website. We have a lot of different options on there, and we also offer free shipping on orders over $75. So be sure to check that out, and thanks for watching.